Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Hope you're doing well, you, your family, your team, everyone around you. Today, I want to talk a bit about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell in general. Now, look, of the many things that I do in my life, I consider myself a storyteller. I love telling stories. I love writing stories. I've been speaking for the last 25 years, and even if I'm hanging out with friends or family or telling stories from the past, telling stories from my life, from the world, from what I've seen, I majored in American studies in college. And so history stories and, I love watching movies and TV shows. And even though I don't do a ton of reading of fiction, I appreciate fiction stories. So again, I consider myself someone who's pretty um, sort of steeped in the art of storytelling and the importance of storytelling, and um, I'm fascinated by it. I'm inspired by it. And that said, I've been thinking more specifically recently in some of my therapy sessions and just in general, like, what are some of the stories I'm telling myself? And are those stories empowering me? Are they helping me? Are they serving me? And if you ask yourself the same question, right? How are the stories that you're telling yourself, about your life, about your work, about your team, about your family, about your spouse, about your friends, about the most important people, about the country, about the world, about the economy? How are they serving you? Now, look, there's a fine line between sort of being in touch with reality and then operating inside of some kind of magical thinking, right? So I'm not in any way advocating that we start just making stuff up and pretending like I live in this world where everything's going great and I have millions of dollars and I have all these places and things and opportunities that don't actually exist. So it's not about telling stories like lies, but what if the stories that we tell ourselves, about our lives, about our work, about the people around us, what if they're not all true? Again, there are facts, there are pieces of data that are real, right? And as Byron Katie likes to say, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And I quote her all the time on that because I think it's an important reminder. But so often in life, I mean, I remember learning years ago in a workshop that I took in my 20s, this concept between there's what happens and then there's the story about what happens, and those are different, right? There's the actual facts, the data. Like, again, if a fly was on the wall and they watched something happen, an interaction, a conversation, an event, and then there's the story about it. And even people who are trained and experts in storytelling, right? News reporters and sports journalists and people who watch things happen and then beautifully tell the story of what happened, they're giving an account of what they see and how they interpret it, right? And that's what we do. We can all go and watch a sporting event, and yeah, the facts are the same. One team won, the other team lost, but our story about it is going to be very different. If I'm rooting for the winning team and you're rooting for the losing team, our story is going to be very different, even if the outcome ultimately is the same. But in life, what happens is we have experiences when we're kids, when we're growing up, we have experiences in the past, right? And we tell stories about those things. And those stories get carried on through the course of our lives. Of course they do. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with the stories that we tell. I think sometimes, though, what we forget is that our stories are editable, our stories are changeable. We're the authors of the story, right? So I've been thinking about this in regards to some aspects of money and health and success and relationships and some of the things as I've been unpacking some of this in therapy more recently. And again, it's not that I've never looked at these things before. I have definitely, but starting to really look at what are some of the stories that I've been telling myself about my life, about my health, about aging, about my business, about money, about marriage, about parenting, about, raising now young adult children and all the things. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of the stories that I have. And they're all based on my real lived experience. I'm not just making them up completely. But as I really start to dissect some of them, I realize that some of them don't empower me. Some of them don't inspire me. Some of them don't leave me with a sense of freedom or hope or possibility. They kind of paint me into a corner in a way. And again, I'm not saying this to whine and complain or to overly criticize myself. I think we all do this. And so as we look at our lives, as we look at our relationships, as we look at our work and our teams and the people around us, I think a really powerful thing that we can do is start to investigate the stories that we're telling ourselves about the people and things in our lives. And just realize there is a gap between the facts and our story. Sometimes it's a very small gap, sometimes it's a pretty significant one. But like I've heard Brene Brown talk about this in a way to address a conflict or an issue or a dynamic with another person is that you can engage with that person and say some version of the story I'm telling myself is, and then fill in the blank, whatever it is. The story I'm telling myself is that you're mad at me or that you're frustrated or disappointed or that that meeting we had yesterday didn't go well or that you wanted me to engage more or less or you want me to leave you alone or whatever. Again, fill in the blank. And in that case, that makes even more sense because it's assumptions that we make. We try to, right? We know people. I know my wife, Michelle, really well, but I can't read her mind. So sometimes if I can come to her and say, the story I'm telling myself is that you want space and you'd rather not hang out and watch this show together or, you know, go out or go in the hot tub or whatever. And that may or may not be true. She might go, no, that's not at all true. I would love to hang out with you, or I'd love to do this. Or she might say, absolutely, that is true. So the story you were telling yourself is accurate. But there's a way in which we say that and we own that we're telling the story. We're not blaming the other person or the circumstance or the situation, right? Again, if it's raining outside and we walk outside, we're going to get wet. But we can have very different stories about that. It could be like, I love getting wet. This is exciting. This is fun. I brought my raincoat. I have my umbrella. I can't wait to run around in the rain and jump in puddles. Or the story we could tell ourselves is like, oh my gosh, I don't have a coat. I don't have an umbrella. My shirt's messed up. My outfit's messed up. I wasn't expecting it to rain. This is terrible. I hate this. I hate the rain. Where's the sun? Same circumstance, different story, right? That's the way life works. And again, I'm not in any way advocating some kind of toxic positivity where we run around just saying, isn't everything great? Isn't everything wonderful? But we get to determine the stories that we tell ourselves about the things going on in our lives. We can't always control what's happening, the outcomes, the interactions, the results, the weather, the economy. I mean, there's so many things that are out of our control, but we do get to determine the story that we're telling ourselves. You know, one of the exercises that I do, and I've shared this on the podcast many times when I'm speaking, I was just speaking virtually to a group this morning, and I talked about this idea of, right, when something bad happens or that we consider bad, we often ask, why this happened to me? Why this happened to me, right? And if we can just change the word to the word for, that's a powerful reframe. That's a different question. Why is this happening for me? It doesn't change the circumstance. The circumstance still is what it is. It changes the question that we ask ourselves, which ultimately can change the story of how we're relating to it, right? And look, we get very attached to our stories and we gravitate towards people who have similar stories that we do about the world, about life, about politics, about the business, about people, about you name it, right? And we gravitate often towards people where we share similar stories or similar opinions or similar biases or similar judgments. And then we feel safe and then we feel closer and connected in a lot of ways, which both make sense, but also at times can be somewhat problematic because our stories aren't just our own. They become stories we have in couples, stories we have in families, stories we have in teams and groups. Oftentimes when I'm working with companies, I come in and realize, oh, there's collective stories from one department about another department. And again, they're not usually based on people completely making stuff up, but they're not often empowering. Oh, you know how accounting is. Oh, you know how marketing is. Oh, you know how the product team is. Oh, well, you know how the sales team is. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but is there a different story we could tell ourselves and a different story that we could collectively have that would be more conducive to us partnering and collaborating with that person or those people or that team? And again, what we often forget is that we're masters at changing our opinions and changing our stories about things, right? You ever met someone and thought to yourself, I do not like this person. They're just bad vibe, don't like them, don't trust them, don't get right. Then you get to know them and you realize, oh, I was wrong. We got off on the wrong foot. We've got different styles. We have different, they rubbed me the wrong way. It was weird. We were tense. It was challenging, whatever. There's people that you work with, people that you know, that you're friends with, even potentially people that you live with these days who you really have a strong relationship with. They may or may not even know this, but when you first met them, your story about them was not that positive. But you changed. Something changed. And on the flip side, we sometimes meet people, really like them, fall in love with them, partner with them, go into business with them, and then things happen and our story changes. And then it's like, I can't stand that person. I don't trust that person. I don't want to work with that person. I don't want to do business with them. And again, we're entitled to that. Absolutely. We get to discern who we want to engage with and who we don't. But we change the story and then the relationship changes. So our stories are really powerful. Right now, there are so many stories flying around about artificial intelligence. Is it great? Is it terrible? Is it exciting? Is it going to ruin the world? Is it going to change the way we do everything? Is it going to put people out of jobs and out of business? Honestly, I don't know. I talk to a lot of different people all the time. I listen to conversations about it. It seems like it's pretty significant. It seems like it's having an impact on the way that things are operating, but I can't quite tell yet what the ultimate result is going to be. I don't know if there's going to be an ultimate result, but how it's going to impact the way we work, the way we live. I mean, it's already starting to, but some days and some moments I hear things or read things or people that I trust will say stuff and it'll freak me out. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Am I going to be relevant? Are people going to even be interested in what I have to say or what I do or the books that I write or the speeches that I give? And should I just pack it up? And then I have other moments where it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much possibility and this is exciting and there's so many things that can come from it. And, people can have access to healthcare and ideas and creativity and automation and support. And it's like, wow, this is fantastic. But in either case, those are just stories I'm telling myself based on the information that I'm gathering, based on what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm experiencing. And then our stories often impact our state of mind, our state of being, right? So, what are some things that we can do in this regard? I mean, the first thing I think it's important for us to do is acknowledge the impact that stories have. Stories are powerful. I've learned over the years as someone who speaks for a living that like I can put up slides and data and information all day long, but what people will remember more than almost anything is a story. I'll have people come up to me and they'll say, "I saw you speak 15 years ago and you told a story about your mom." And I'll be like, "Well, where were we and what was I talking about?" And they're like, "I don't know, but I remember that story about your mom." We listen to stories with a different part of our brain. I can feel it when I'm up on stage, when I'm with a group of people, even virtually. I did a virtual event earlier today and it was like I can feel the energy change when I start telling a story versus when I'm just talking and sharing ideas versus when I'm sharing data and information or concepts and again, not that those things, data, information, concepts, frameworks aren't relevant, but they're different than stories. So looking at the power of stories in our lives, right? If you're in marketing, you're telling a story. If you're in sales, you're telling a story. If you do something in the creative arts, you're definitely telling a story. And we love stories, books and movies and TV shows and, you know, plays and on and on. It's like we're enthralled as human beings in stories. So just starting to really notice how impacted we are by stories. Then more specifically, a second step for us is to take a look at what are the driving stories that define us. Because we have lots of stories about lots of things, but there are certain stories that are kind of fundamental to us, both positive and negative, right? A few weeks ago, I did a episode on this concept of what if everything went your way, right? It's this right idea, concept, question, or phrase or statement, bold statement that Michelle, my wife, and I've been saying to each other for a while. Everything goes my way. Everything goes my way. It came from a story. It came from a TV show, Shrinking, that we watched, that we love. But starting to say that and starting to just put that out into the universe, if you will, has started to have an impact on both of us and how we think, how we operate, how we relate to the world. Now, it's kind of made up. It's an affirmation, it's a phrase, it's a saying, but it's like, what if everything went my way? What if things worked out? What if it didn't have to be so hard? What if it's easier than I think? I mean, all of these things, they're phrases, they're questions, they're concepts, but they're stories. And we can change them. They're not etched in stone, they're not fixed. So, starting to investigate what are some of those key stories that I define my life around, both the ones that inspire me and maybe the ones that don't. Because the ones that inspire us, we can hang on to those, keep telling those stories if they inspire us, if they empower us, if they give us energy and life. The ones that don't, what if we change them? What if they're not true? I hear people saying things all the time. You know, Louise Hay, who started the publishing company Hay House that's published my last three books, she passed away several years ago. But she used to often say when she would hear people say something out loud, like, I'm not good with money, or I struggle in relationships. I remember being in an event with her in San Francisco back in like 2010, 2011, and she would yell out, That's an affirmation. And Louise's work was really focused on the power of thought, the power of word, the power of belief. And so the idea is when we say things like, I'm not good with money, or I struggle in relationships, or fill in the blank. And that may be true based on your lived experience and based on some information we could look at. But by saying it over and over again, you keep telling the story and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? There's a power of intention. There's a law of attraction, if you will, like attracts like. So we keep pulling in experiences to reinforce our belief system. Now, what if we said, I've struggled with money in the past, but I'm open to it being different? Or I've struggled with relationships in the past, but I'm open to it being different. I sometimes get scared about this or that, or I've sometimes had a hard time in the past with change or with when the company reorgs or when, we have new technology thrust upon us like artificial intelligence or whatever. But again, you see how that's different when we say I've struggled in the past or this has been hard for me before, or sometimes I get scared. That's different than saying like I'm not good at that because it becomes this definitive sort of etched in stone thing and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes an affirmation, right? As I've shared, I think before,